Okay, in the second rules video we'll look at the first two phases of the turn sequence. The first one is priority phase. Now in a scenario it'll often tell you who has priority, but in this particular one, Ugh looks like stand, it doesn't mention it. So what you have to do is you roll for priority, so both sides roll a die, and the side that gets the highest die roll will be the one that actually takes priority. Now I believe you can use things like might to affect that die in the same way that you can do in the strategy battle game. Now, difference in this thing from the strategy battle game is if there's a tie, you roll off again, which is different, because in the other game you actually, if there's a tie, the team that came second last in the last round goes first, they win the tie. But that's not true in this. You've got to keep rolling off until someone wins. Now the movement phase is you basically have to move all your companies from one formation before you can start moving another formation. You've got, each formation has a, each type of company has a movement allowance. For example, the cavalry here have a movement of 10, whereas orcs, some of them have got movements of 6, some have got 7. The lighter ones, like the scouts, have got 7s, and Krishnar's trackers are really fast with a movement of 8. Now when you're moving, you've got to ensure that no part of the company moves further than its movement allowance. And they say in the manual the best thing to do about that is check the corners, because unless you're moving straight forward, the corners are always going to end up moving the furthest. At least one of the corners will end up moving the furthest distance. Another thing to remember is you can't move through friendly formations, and obviously you can't move through enemy formations. While you're moving, your formation can change the way the companies are organised. It just says you can rearrange its companies as you wish, but companies must remain touching, but can be turned around or arranged in a different legal configuration. We looked at legal configurations in the last video. One thing to be aware of is difficult terrain. Now difficult terrain costs double the movement allowance to actually go through it. So say an orc formation that was moving through the woods over there, which would be difficult terrain, they'd only be able to move half the distance that they normally could. Now if you notice on this battlefield, all those bushes and things, they represent heavy undergrowth, and that is difficult terrain, even though it's not actually in the forest as such. And that stretches 8 inches from the northern edge of the map. You could have impassable terrain. There is no impassable terrain on this particular map. Even the little rocky areas would count as difficult terrain. You're obviously not permitted to move off the playing area. If you do that, you can't, basically. It doesn't say the formations disappear, it just says you can't do it. Well, there is an obvious exception to that. It's if the scenario says you can. For example, this scenario says that Isengard win if they can exit the western map edge over there, which is quite a ways. You've got to get through all these Rohan units. Another interesting thing in this game, which I've not seen in any other war game, I don't think, is the fact that if the enemy are within 6 inches of you, basically all your movement counts as double. That's probably because they're wary of the enemy, so the formation's got half an eye on what the opponents are doing all the time. The penalty for that and the penalty for terrain don't stack, so it wouldn't be halved and then halved again. Now, one thing the rule book does say, if you're going to change the direction or shape of a formation, make sure you move the company that's going to have to move the furthest first. The reason they're doing that is that means that the lead companies can't. Well, if you do it the other way around, you're likely to end up with the lead companies getting out of contact with the companies following behind. It's just, they call it measurement etiquette. It's just probably a sensible way of doing it. Well, it is a sensible way of doing it. Monsters, even though there aren't any in this particular scenario, you don't have to worry about the movement. You just make sure that the base only moves as far as the monster's maximum movement. We got flying monsters like eagles and dragons, etc., and Nazgul, but we're not going to talk about those. There's a condition that formations can fall into, which is called disordered. Now, a disordered formation basically can't really do anything unless it passes a courage check. If it passes that check, it can regroup, move, shoot, charge, etc. as normal. If it doesn't, it means disordered for the remainder of the turn. So in fact, the only action a disordered formation can take is to fall back, but it doesn't have to fall back. It may only fall back in the movement phase immediately after it's failed a courage test to regroup. There's special distances that things can fall back to. It's in this little chart here. Now, there's a bit of a nasty rule on fallbacks. If you can't make a fallback move, the formation is destroyed. Okay, that'll do for the second video on this rules tutorial.